With cameras from Patricia's brunch guests rolling and neighbors gathering along the roadside, Patricia faced a devastating choice between opening the gate or becoming social media infamous as the woman who blocked a military convoy. Red-faced, she unlocked the gate herself. The tank rolled through first, followed by the entire procession of military vehicles, and finally, a caravan of pickup trucks carrying James's former unit members, all veterans in civilian clothes, many wearing caps or shirts identifying their military service. Several neighbors spontaneously began to applaud. The reunion weekend became legendary in county history. Veterans shared stories around bonfires. Local families were invited for a special demonstration of military equipment, and 3 different news outlets covered the event after videos of tank versus gate went viral on social media. Patricia remained conspicuously absent, though lights burned late in her home office as she consulted with her attorneys. The following Wednesday, rather than the expected escalation of legal threats, James received a surprising call. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Patricia Winters," she said, her voice noticeably less imperious. "I wonder if we might discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the access situation." 2 days later, they met on neutral ground, the office of County Mediator Eleanor Washington, who'd resolved agricultural disputes for 30 years. Patricia arrived without lawyers, dressed in practical jeans and boots, rather than her usual designer attire. "My father was in Vietnam," she said unexpectedly, after they'd taken their seats. "He never talked about it. I didn't understand what that reunion meant to you and your friends." She straightened her shoulders. "That said, I still have legitimate concerns about privacy and property values." To James's surprise, Patricia presented detailed plans for an alternative solution, a new shared access road that would curve farther from her house, with landscape berms on her side for privacy and sound reduction. She offered to cover 70% of construction costs. "Why the change of heart?" James asked directly. Patricia glanced away. My social circle hasn't been particularly supportive since the incident, and 3 neighbors I've had disputes with have offered to contribute to your legal defense fund." She met his eyes. "I'm a businesswoman. I recognize when a strategy isn't working." 6 months later, they held a small ribbon cutting for the new road, wider, professionally graded, and actually more convenient for ranch operations. Several neighbors attended, along with the sheriff, and even a small delegation from Fort Hood. James and Patricia were never friends, but they developed a respectful relationship. She eventually joined the County Agricultural Commission, surprising everyone by advocating for reasonable compromises between development and farming interests. And each year at the military reunion, now a tradition at the Caldwell Ranch, James would raise a toast to unexpected allies and worthy opponents. Sometimes they're the same person. The veterans would cheer while glancing toward the distant outline of Patricia's house, where she now deliberately scheduled her own weekend away during the event. But the highlight of reunion weekend was always the same, when General Santos would arrive in whatever armored vehicle she could requisition for rural navigation training that coincidentally passed by the ranch each year, a good-natured reminder of the time a 60-ton tank helped teach a valuable lesson about community, respect, and the unintended consequences of blocking a soldier's way home. James climbed back into his truck and drove a few hundred yards back down the road, pulling onto the shoulder. He sat there for several minutes, staring at the distant gate through his windshield, memories flooding back. This road had been his connection to Uncle Frank and the Caldwell legacy for as long as he could remember. Summer after summer, he'd ridden along in Uncle Frank's old pickup, windows down, country music playing, as they made their way to the ranch. It was on this very road where Uncle Frank had first let him take the wheel at age 12, laughing nervously as James navigated the bumpy dirt path. "This land has meaning, son," Uncle Frank used to say. "It's not just dirt and grass. It's history. It's family." James pulled out his phone and took several photos of the gate and the no trespassing signs. Then he opened his Maps app to see if there might be another way to access the property. The satellite view confirmed what he already knew. The ranch was essentially landlocked. Mountains rose steeply on the western border, Cottonwood Creek formed a natural barrier to the south, and dense forest covered the northern boundary. This access road had been the only practical way in or out since his grandfather's time. He tried calling the number on the security sign, but reached only an automated system asking him to leave a message. Next, he called the county assessor's office, but it was already after 5 p.m. on a Friday. An automated message informed him they would reopen on Monday. James drove into town, to the Broken Spoke Diner, where Uncle Frank had eaten breakfast nearly every day for 40 years. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and several older patrons looked up. A few faces he recognized broke into smiles. "Well, I'll be damned," said Martha Whitmore, the 70-something waitress who'd been serving coffee there since James was a boy. "If it isn't little Jimmy Caldwell, all grown up and looking like Frank in his younger days." Over coffee and Martha's famous apple pie, James learned that Patricia Winters had installed the gate 3 days after Uncle Frank's funeral, almost as if she'd been waiting for the opportunity. "That woman," Martha said, shaking her head, "has caused more trouble in 3 years than this town has seen in 30. Frank tried to be neighborly, but she treated him like an annoyance." By the time James left the diner, armed with local gossip and phone numbers for several county officials, the sun was setting. He found a room at the Crossroads Motel on the edge of town and spent the night researching property easements on his laptop, determination building with every article he read. This James Caldwell never expected to become a rancher at 45. After 20 years in the Army, including 3 harrowing tours in Afghanistan, where he'd earned a Purple Heart and Bronze Star, he'd planned a quiet retirement in a suburban home with a small garden and maybe a dog. But when his Uncle Frank died unexpectedly from a heart attack, leaving him the 200-acre Caldwell family ranch in rural Texas, something stirred in James's soul. The reading of the will had been emotional. "To my nephew James, who always loved this land, even when he was too busy defending our country to visit it, I leave my entire ranch and all its equipment." The lawyer had read. "The land has been in our family for 3 generations. It's in your blood, son." 3 weeks later, James found himself driving his pickup down a familiar dirt road he hadn't traveled in years, anticipation building as he approached the homestead where he'd spent childhood summers learning to ride horses and mend fences alongside Uncle Frank. As the truck rounded the final bend, James slammed on the brakes. A massive iron gate blocked the access road, a gate that had never been there before. It stood 8 feet tall with pointed spikes at the top, festooned with multiple "No Teo ESPSNG" and "Private Pluro POT" signs. A state-of-the-art security camera swiveled toward him, its red light blinking menacingly. When James tried the old ranch key in the heavy padlock, it didn't even fit the keyhole. A knot formed in his stomach as he realized someone had deliberately cut off access to his family's land. Stepping back from the gate, James noticed a small metal sign with the phone number and the name Sentinel Security Systems. A camera mounted on a nearby post swiveled to follow his movements, its black lens reflecting the Texas sun. This wasn't just a gate, it was a statement. After hanging up, James drove to the local diner where he learned Patricia had become notorious in the county. She'd filed complaints against the volunteer fire department for siren noise, sued a neighboring farm for rooster sounds, and even tried to shut down the annual county fair for excessive traffic. Local attorneys had taken to calling her the litigator behind her back. That evening, James sat on Uncle Frank's weathered porch swing, nursing a beer and staring at financial figures that didn't add up. Building a new access road would drain the ranch's modest emergency fund. Fighting Patricia in court could take years and tens of thousands in legal fees. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel Ortiz, his former Army squad leader. "Still good for the reunion next month, Captain. The guys can't wait to see the famous ranch you always talked about." James had almost forgotten. Months ago, he'd invited his old unit, the Desert Defenders of the 2nd Battalion, 69th Armor Regiment, to reunite at the ranch. 24 veterans had committed to attending, men and women who'd saved each other's lives in combat and remained closer than family. When James called Miguel to explain the situation, his old friend listened carefully before saying, You know who you should talk to. Colonel Santos. She made Brigadier General last year and runs half the armored